Okay, we are going to be on chapter 20 now. How many dancing rabbits have you seen in your life? Bryce said to Edward. I can tell you how many I have seen. One, you. That's how you and me are going to make some money. I seen it the last time I was in Memphis. Folks put on a kind of show right there on the street corner and people pay 'em for it. I've seen it. I walked to the town. The walk to the town took all night. Bryce walked without stopping, carrying Edward under one arm and talking to him the whole time. Edward tried to listen, but the terrible scarecrow feeling had come back, the feeling he had when he was hanging by his ears in the old lady's garden, the feeling that nothing mattered and that nothing would ever matter again. Not only did Edward feel hollow, he ached. Every part of his china body hurt. He ached for Sarah Ruth. He wanted to hold him, or he wanted her to hold him. He wanted to dance for her. And he did dance, but it was not for Sarah Ruth. Edward danced for strangers on a dirty street corner in Memphis. Bryce played his harmonica and moved Edward's strings, and Edward bowed and shuffled and swayed, and people stopped to stare and point and laugh. On the ground in front of them was Sarah Ruth's button box. The lid was open to encourage people to drop change inside. Mama, said a small child, look at that bunny. I want to touch him. He reached out his hand for Edward. No, said the mother, dirty. She pulled the child back away from Edward. Nasty, she said. A man wearing a hat stopped and stared at Edward and Bryce. It's a sin to dance, he said, and then after a long pause, he said, it's a particular sin for rabbits to dance. The man took off his hat and held it over his heart. He stood and watched the boy and the rabbit for a long time. Finally, he put his hat back on his head and walked away. The shadows lengthened. The sun became an orange, dusty ball low in the sky. Bryce started to cry. Edward saw his tears on the pavement, but the boy did not stop playing his harmonica. He did not stop making Edward dance. The old woman, leaning on a cane, stepped up close to them. She stared at Edward with deep eyes. Pellegrina, thought the dancing rabbit. She nodded at him. Look at me, he said to her. His arms and legs jerked. Look at me. You got your wish. I have learned how to love. It's a terrible thing. I'm broken. My heart is broken. Help me. The old woman turned and hobbled away. Come back, thought Edward. Fix me. Bryce cried harder. He made Edward dance faster. Finally, when the sun was gone and the streets were dark, Bryce stopped playing his harmonica. I'm done now, he said. He let Edward fall to the pavement. I ain't gonna cry no more. Bryce wiped his nose Bryce wiped his nose and his eyes with the back of his hand. He picked up the button box and looked inside. We got us enough money to get something to eat, he said. Come on, Jangles. Okay, so chapter 21, they're gonna go to Neil's Diner. The diner was called Neil's. The word was written in big red neon letters that flashed on and off. Inside it was warm and bright and smelled like fried chicken and toast and coffee. Bryce sat at the counter and put Edward on a stool next to him. He leaned the rabbit's forehead up against the counter so that he would not fall. What are you going to have, sugar? The waitress said to Bryce. Give me some pancakes, said Bryce, and some eggs, and I want steak too. I want a big old steak, and I want some toast and some coffee. The waitress leaned forward and pulled at one of Edward's ears and pushed him backwards so she could see his face. This your rabbit, she said to Bryce. Yes'm, he's mine now. He belonged to my sister. Bryce wiped at his nose with the back of his hand. We're in show business, me and him. Is that right, said the waitress. She had a name tag on the front of her dress. Marlene, it said. She looked at Edward's face, then she let go of his ear, and he fell forward so his head rested against the counter again. Go ahead, Marlene, thought Edward. Push me around. Do with me as you will. What does it matter? I'm broken. Broken. The food came, and Bryce ate all of it without ever looking up from his plate. Well, you was hungry for sure, said Marlene as she cleared away the plates. I reckon show business is hard work. Yes'm, said Bryce. Marlene tucked a check under the coffee cup. Bryce picked it up and looked at it and then shook his head. I ain't got enough, he said to Edward. Ma'am, he said to Marlene when she came back and filled up his coffee cup, I ain't got enough. What, sugar? I ain't got enough money. She stopped pouring the coffee and looked at him. You're gonna have to talk to Neil about that. Neil, it turned out, was both the owner and the cook. He was a large, red-haired, red-faced man who came out of the kitchen holding a spatula in one hand. You came in here hungry, right? He said to Bryce. Yes, sir, said Bryce. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. And you ordered some food, and I cooked it, and Marlene brought it to you, right? I reckon, said Bryce. You reckon, said Neil. He brought the spatula down on the countertop with a thwack. Bryce jumped. Yes, sir. No, sir. I cooked it for you, said Neil. Yes, sir, said Bryce. He picked Edward up off the stool and held him close. Everyone in the diner had stopped eating. They were all staring at the boy and the rabbit and Neil. Only Marlene looked away. You ordered it. I cooked it. Marlene served it. You ate it. Now, said Neil, I want my money. He tapped the spatula lightly on the counter. Bryce cleared his throat. You ever seen a rabbit dance, he said. How's that, said Neil. You ever before in your life seen a rabbit dance? Bryce set Edward on the floor and started pulling the strings attached to his feet, making him do a slow shuffle. He put his harmonica in his mouth and played a sad song that went along with the dance. Somebody laughed. Bryce took the harmonica out of his mouth and he said, he could dance some more if you want. He could dance to pay for what I ate. Neil stared at Bryce, and then without warning, he reached down, grabbed a hold of Edward. This is what I think of dancing rabbits, said Neil, and he swung Edward by his feet, swung him up so that his head hit the edge of the countertop. There was a loud crack. Bryce screamed, and the world, Edward's world, went black. Okay, we're in chapter 22 next. It was dusk, and Edward was walking down a sidewalk. He was walking on his own, putting one foot in front of the other without any assistance from anybody. He was wearing a fine suit made of red silk. He walked down the sidewalk, and then he turned into a path that led up to a house with lighted windows. I know this house, thought Edward. This is Abeline's house. I'm on Egypt Street. Lucy came running out of the front door of the house, barking and jumping and wagging her tail. Down, girl, said the deep, gruff voice. Edward looked up, and there was Bull standing at the door. Hello, Malone, said Bull. Hello, good old rabbit pie. We've been waiting for you. Bull swung the door wide, and Edward walked inside. Abeline was there, and Nellie, and Lawrence, and Bryce. Susanna, called Nellie. Jangles, said Bryce. Edward, said Abeline. She held her arms out for him. But Edward stood still. He looked around the room. Okay, so let's stop and think for a minute. Edward is thinking about that he is back on Egypt Street, but for some reason, Lucy and Bull are both there. Lawrence and Nellie are there. Abeline is there. Bryce is there. And then he stops and he looks around the room. Who do you think he might be looking for? Who's missing that he hasn't seen? You searching for Sarah Ruth? Bryce asked. Edward nodded. You got to go outside if you want to see